and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musitz.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Mike, today's guest on the podcast is Dan Pfeiffer. He is a listener to this podcast, and he reached out to us via an email. And that started a conversation about many sailing topics, including heavy weather sailing, which is what today's episode is all about. And when we say heavy weather sailing, we're talking about breezes from 15 to say 25, maybe 30 knots. So we're not talking about sailing in storms, but sort of the winds are a little higher than maybe many of us are comfortable with. And I will say that on Narragansett Bay, where I keep my boat, it's very common in the afternoon to get a sea breeze, and winds are typically 15 to 20 knots, between like 1 and 5. It's like just clockwork. Almost every warm summer day that happens. So you got to get accustomed to sailing in those higher winds and what to do. And so that's what this episode's all about. Dan has done a lot of that type of sailing, and we had a great conversation.
Cool. Bela, I love tapping into our community to find interesting topics. And this conversation with Dan sounds great. So I think listeners are going to really want to focus on A, how heavy wind impacts safe sailing, and then B, how sailors can get comfortable with heavier winds so that they're comfortable and confident and making good decisions when they're out on the water.
Yeah, those are excellent points, Mike. And so let's jump right into my conversation with Dan. Hello, Dan. How are you?
Hey, it's working.
Yeah, how about that, huh? It's remarkable.
Yeah, it's 2 minutes to go and the technology's working.
Yes. I can remember in the early 80s, I worked at IBM, and they spent a couple $1 million to set up this video conferencing system between two of our locations. One was in Yorktown Heights, New York, and the other was in Palo Alto, California. And they had a dedicated line and all that stuff. And that thing never worked. It was buggy. Now, the good news is the cost has come way down, but the reliability is still about the same.
Hey, that's one of my themes. You being an engineer, right? What kind of engineer are you?
Yes. Yeah.
What type of
engineer?
Okay. So
mechanical.
one of the things I teach at a college here, I don't teach engineering, but one of the things I teach my students is R equals 1 over P, where reliability is inversely proportional to the number of parts. And it's a concept that I teach them out on the first day of class, and it's a concept we always come back to, and it's a concept I use on the boat too.
Yeah, exactly. That's why airplanes are so scary.
I know, right? Yeah. So I used to work for the Austin company, which is it's not around anymore really, but they did complex industrial buildings. They would build complex industrial buildings, like they built the 747 assembly building for Boeing and things like that. Mm-hmm. And some of the engineers had developed this machine to measure floor flatness, and it was this machine that had all these arms on it that would reach out and touch the floor and make measurements. And they're like, well, we've got a machine. We don't need your fancy lasers, Right. By the time they got this thing to work, everything was lasers.
Yes. Yes. Well, there's always a competing technology.
Yeah. It's not always helpful.
Yeah. So what do you teach, Dan?
I teach geography, audio recording, and sometimes technical writing.
Oh, wow.
So a weird mix of things. I mean, how could geography be connected to audio? But I did in graduate school, I worked on a project of acoustic wave propagation modeling over the landscape. So it was kind of for the purpose of the optimization of warning siren locations, things like that. So there's a connection.
Yeah. So I remember when I was in grad school, the guy down the hall was basically dumping sound waves into the ground and then listening for what comes back And part of that idea was, looking for certain things. There would be certain patterns in recognition. So I get the connection.
Yeah. There's a lot of that in geology.
Yes.
That's a big part of the field, really.
Yeah.
And how else are you going to find out what's down there? You going to dig a hole, really?
Well, that's one way. Yeah.
Not very, but I wish I had hung some of my guitars on the wall behind me now.
Oh,
but, I have my sailing books.
Yes. Very good.
I thought that would be a better background for our subject, but
yeah.
So listen, I have like pages of outline that I've whittled down to one. Which
Okay.
is the way things should be. But I don't know how you want to proceed with this. Maybe you want to ask me questions and that'll guide us through. I have a bunch of points that I think are worth making, but it's always better if they're in the context of a discussion rather than me just rattling off.
Yeah, I agree. So usually I like to try to have a conversation or a discussion, and I view part of my responsibility is to try to ask leading questions.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So you didn't go to law school.
No, not those kind of leading questions.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
and I will have I'll have a set of references for you to post.
Oh, great.
Like books and websites and things like that, because a lot of the things, like I have a list here of things we may touch on, but really should be their own topic for in-depth discussion, like safety in general, best practices in gear, boat design, sail trim, storm tactics, because we really aren't talking about storm tactics here.
That's correct.
Maneuvering under power in the marina, things that you need to have a handle on, but aren't really germane to the topic of what I think the topic is getting out and sailing in 20 to 30 knot winds and becoming comfortable with that.
Yes. So that's exactly the topic I want to focus on. And I think all those other topics are great ones, and maybe we can do future episodes. I'm always looking for good, interesting guests.
Well, I'm not the expert for those other topics. I know a little bit, but there are people who know a lot more, certainly. And I was thinking you should do. I'm not going to tell you what you should do, but I would consider doing like every episode of yours that ends in a 0. Make that about safety and seamanship in some respect, not just, and there's a lot of ground to cover there.
Yes.
Boat handling, but things like that, and so you're always coming back to that in a way.
Yeah. Well, I like to have a blend of experts on the podcast and practitioners.
Yes.
And because I think they bring different perspectives, and they tend to explain things differently. And I think that's important.
I like also you have novices on.
Yes.
And that's really interesting. It's an interesting perspective. And sometimes like, oh, well, you might want to look at this or that, but you're on the right track, or
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well, I mean, that's, this is, one of the things I learned from my business podcast that I do, which I've been doing, I started 2 years prior to this one, is that you got to kind of find a niche. You got to find something that's a little different than the other 2 million podcasts that are out there.
Oh, yeah.
And so the notion of having ordinary, non-expert, non-famous people on the podcast is both part of my strategy on the business one, as well as the sailing podcast is to go for people that you run into on the dock. And
I think there's there's kind of a gap too, because there's a lot of stuff out there about racing, and there's a lot of stuff out there about offshore sailing, blue water sailing. But that in between stuff where really most of us live is kind of not a frequent topic of conversation.
Right.
Like
Right.
I sailed last season, I sailed 120 days,
Wow.
and that's a 6-month season. So I got out a lot, but I only
Yes.
covered 1,600 miles in that.
Yeah.
But I was out a lot, and I don't know. That means something. I
Yeah.
was out on I think I don't remember the numbers, but I had like 20 or 25 days we were out where winds were topping 20.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
mean I seek that out.
Yes.
Um, I'm eager for when the small craft advisory goes up. Well, let's go.
Yeah. Well, you should come sail on Narragansett Bay
Yeah,
because we get an afternoon sea breeze and it's
yeah,
pretty darn reliable June,
yeah,
July, and August.
yeah,
And
yeah.
about
I know
midday,
Narragansett Bay.
yeah.
Yeah, my brother lives in Providence. Actually, he lived in Providence. Now he lives on the Vineyard. But and my wife's brother lives in Bristol, right on the
Oh,
water.
okay.
And
Yeah, yeah,
I haven't really sailed the bay, but my boat's from there. My boat was built in Portsmouth,
yeah.
so it looks like just a. I've sailed a little bit on Narragansett. I have this idea of going when they do a family reunion of going there by boat.
That'd be kind of
It's
cool.
not it's very cool, but it's not that easy. It's a commitment of
Well,
time. But
that's true.
you go down the Hudson River and up through Long
Yeah,
Island Sound, and yeah, I think that would be an interesting trip.
yeah, yeah. So let's dive into today's topic, Dan.
Okay.
So you wrote an email to me, and that sort of started communication. You shared with me a little bit about some of your sailing experience and background, and I thought one of the things that would be really interesting to talk about, because in that email you mentioned you do a significant amount of uh, sailing when the winds are in excess of 15 knots, let's just say,
Yes.
right? Which is when a lot of people start going back to the marina. And
Yes.
and that intrigued me, number one, because I sail on Narragansett Bay, and every afternoon the winds are blowing between 15 to 20. So if you're going to go sailing, it's something you need to get comfortable with. And it's something you can get comfortable with. And just like many other things, at least I start out slow, and I gain some confidence and gain some experience, and move from there. So that's what we want to talk about today. So why don't you start a little bit with just sort of telling us where you sail and what boat you're doing this on.
Okay, I sail on Lake Erie out of Grand River, Ohio, just a bit east of Cleveland. We've been sailing here for about 30 years. I have a Pearson 10 meter. It's a 33-foot boat, very stout rig on this boat. It's well suited to what I do with it. Maybe that's why I
Hmm.
do what I do with it. I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
and we've had that boat for 23 years now. Yeah, that's
And what
that's
kind of
what I do.
bottom does that have? Is that a fin keel?
It's a fin keel with a skeg hung rudder.
Got it. Okay.
And that was something I looked for when I was shopping.
Yep.
It
And
appealed to me.
uh, uh, a wheel or a tiller?
I have a wheel. The boats came equipped either way. Um, my wheel is at the front of the cockpit, which is something that Pearson did. It's a little unusual, but I find it's very handy because everything's within reach. And everything's within reach. Traveler's right in front of the wheel. The primary winches are right there next to you. But also, there's a nice space at the back of the cockpit where you can sit two people who know nothing about what they're doing, and they'll be out of your way.
Yes.
So that's become very handy. Now my dog sits there, but so there's
Yes.
really only room for one.
Yes. So tell me what was there an event that sort of one that happened and you said to yourself, gee, I got to get better at this and I need to practice going out in stronger winds and understanding what my boat can do and how to handle the boat? Was there a triggering event that happened?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Many years ago, we had a 26-foot Pearson. We were sailing back from the west end of the lake, and it got real windy this day and rainy and ugly. So we ducked in to a place called Rocky River, which is just west of Cleveland. Rocky River is this harbor that's down in a gorge that must be 60 feet deep. So you're very, very well protected from the southwest wind that we were seeing that day. But then the skies cleared up, and we were like, "Wow, look at that! It's all nice. Let's get going again." But it wasn't nice. It was nice and clear, but it was still blowing 25 knots out there. And once we were out, we were not going back in because it was upwind, and we had a little too much sail up. And we're like, okay, well, let's get things under control. We can duck in at the next place, which is Cleveland. Um, but we got things under control, and there were these beautiful 2 to 4 foot rollers blowing in from the west. Just they had become very well formed from a nice steady wind for several hours, and all of a sudden we were catching surfs to 7 knots and 8 knots. And like, oh my gosh, this is amazing! But we were completely under control, and 9 knots, and I think we topped out at 10.3. It got to the point where like I'd be steering and my wife was calling the speeds off the knot meter, and I said, don't bother telling me if it's under 8 because you're just having to it's just too much. So it was very exciting, and but it was also very satisfying to feel a sense of control in
Yes.
this.
Yes.
And that sort of led me maybe to figure out, well, how can I take best advantage of these conditions? What are the things I should do to the boat to make it better in these conditions? What kind of boat is better in these conditions? And maybe that's sort of what led me to where I am now. We have a different boat now. And another time, the thing that led me to this boat, my Pearson 10M, I had a friend, an acquaintance really, an online acquaintance who bought a 10M before I had mine. He bought it. It was out in the west end of the lake, and he needed to move it to Erie. So I went to do the delivery with him. We'd never been on the boat before. He had never been driving a boat that was more than 22 feet, and he had a tiller. Now he's on a 33-foot, 12,000-pound boat with a wheel. He's never driven a
Yeah.
boat with a wheel. And we're out there, and it's blowing 25 knots out of the west, very challenging conditions. And he's keeping the boat under control with, he's a little overcompensating here and there, but he's under control. And I'm like, wow, this boat is really easy to keep under control in these conditions. That impressed me. That got my attention.
Yeah.
So it moved up on my list of potential boats to move up to.
Yeah. So if you had to say in one paragraph, sort of say, hey, these are the things that I start doing or I start thinking about when I know the winds are on their way up, right? Right now they're at 10 knots, everything's fine and hunky dory, but I know in 45 minutes they're going to be at 15, and in an hour and a half they're going to be at 20. What do you start sort of thinking through in your mind and making that sort of mental checklist of, okay, here's the things I'm going to do?
Well, I'd put that into two different scenarios. One is where you're out there already and the wind is coming up. The other is where the wind out there is blowing and you rig to go out in it purposefully.
Yeah, let's do the first one. Let's do the one
first scenario.
We're out there sailing.
And the answer is the same for both. The first thing is smaller sails.
Yes.
Just shorten sails. If there's one thing you take from this to sail in windier weather, shorten sail. There's a lot of energy out there when the wind is blowing. You don't need a lot of sail area.
Right.
So, imagine you're out in 10 knots and you have your number 1 Genoa and a full main and you're heeled to 15 degrees. Then you're out in 20 knots with a number 3 and a reefed main and you're heeling to 15 degrees. That's because the loads are the same. Right? You reduce the sail area, the loads are the same. The heel angle is a function of the riding moment of the boat. That's fixed, right? That's a constant. That doesn't change. So if you can handle the boat in 10 knots with the big sails, you're going to be okay in 20 knots with the small sails. The loads are going to be the same. What's still going to be the sea state, and you have to learn how to handle that.
Yeah.
But okay, but so shorten sail. I'll put in a reef first. If I'm out like that, Um, I might. It depends. I switching to another sail, another head sail, is quite a chore on a roller furling boat. And
Mhm.
when the conditions are getting ugly, that's the worst time to have to do that kind of thing. If you have a tough luff foil, say like a racer would have, oh, that's a beautiful setup for this because you can do a head sail change without taking down the first sail. And when you get good at it, you can do that without having to tack between in the changeover.
Right. Right.
And oh my gosh, that's such a great advantage. I had that on the 20-foot boat. I don't have it on the 10M. I have a roller furling. So you can partly roll the sail up, but there are downsides to that. Um, so the first thing is
So
you
Dan,
can
before
take
you
a.
go on to the downsides, let me ask you, when do you what wind speed do you sort of take in your first reef and start rolling up your jib?
I'd say 15 to 18, depending on the waves and depending on which way I'm going.
Yes.
If I'm running, it's not as big a deal. If it's very wavy and I need a little more power to deal with the waves, I might prefer to run a little overpowered than a little underpowered, just because of being able to recover through the waves.
Yes.
So, and
Yes.
every boat is different, and that's something you have to learn about your boat. Like, where are my crossover points from full main to a reef main? And there's some steps in between. You can depower the main. You can put on more halyard tension, uh, tighten the outhaul, put on a Cunningham. If you have a fractional rig, you can add backstay to flatten the mainsail, depower it that way. Um, so that gives you another gear, right? It gives you another gear in between full main and first reef.
Yes.
Um, and I think that's really useful. But it also means you need your reefing gear to be easy to use, right? My reefing gear is all at the mast. I don't have any lines run aft, but and that's just because it's very simple.
Yep.
And I don't have any trouble dealing with that. If I was, I don't know, if I was really doing a lot of distance things single-handed, I might want lines led aft. And maybe as I get older and a little less mobile, I might want lines run aft. Uh, those are things worth considering. But if you have your halyard in the cockpit, but everything else is up at the mast, well, now you got to run back and forth. And
Back and
that's
forth,
not
right? That's a real pain.
that's a real pain. Well, it's also a risk. So
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things that I always think about is, let's say I have a new boat, or a new to me boat, and I'm going
mhm,
out and the winds are going to get stronger. The first time I reef the sails on my boat, I don't want to be reefing them when it's blowing at 15 knots.
yeah,
I want
absolutely.
I want to practice this, and I want to learn how to do it almost with my eyes closed
hmm
when it's 10 knots, so that I understand what the loads are going to be like. I understand what's going to be the challenging part of this reefing process and what's going to
Yeah.
be the easy part, and sort of what things I may want to say, well, that didn't work very well at 10 knots. I know damn right it's not going to work at 15. So I need to figure out a different way. And I think that's one of the mistakes that we often make. We don't practice these things in, I'll use the word, calmer conditions, so that when you get into the high wind, that's the first time you're doing it, man, you can get in a lot of trouble.
That's for sure. I would practice at the dock.
Yes.
Learn the steps at the dock, then go out in 7, 8, 9 knots, and then do it in 10, 12 knots, and work your way up to the big wind for sure. In the in some racing, offshore racing, you have to check in with the committee boat at the beginning of the race. Some of those races, they require you to have your storm sails up when you check in. And that's so you've gone through that process of putting them up and in more benign conditions.
Yes.
They want to make sure you've done that. So I agree completely. You have to practice this stuff. And really fundamentally, on my list of things here, practice, practice, practice. Go sailing more, and go sailing more. Just go sailing. Get out there.
Right.
The
Right.
more time you spend on the boat, the more comfortable you'll be with all of these processes.
The other comment I wanted to make is about 15 knots. That's right. That's when I start to reef.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I do that is several fold. Number one, as I start reefing in the sails, the boat sails nicer.
Absolutely.
It's calmer. I have a balanced helm. Nothing's overpowered, right? I don't have a lee helm, or it's just nice and well balanced. Number one,
Mm-hmm.
and number two is if I wait till 20 knots and I have all of my sails out, it's a lot freaking harder to reef my sail, a full sail at 20 knots, than it is a full sail at 15 knots.
Right.
So I'm with you. I'm like, I want to reef early, because it's always easy to let sail out. That part's pretty easy. It's getting it in that's the challenge. And so reef early, it's easier, it goes smoother. You're not as stressed. The other people on the boat are not as stressed. It's just calming to do it that way, I think.
I agree. And also, I think it's really valuable to learn how to heave too.
Yes.
Assuming your boat can heave to. A lot of modern boats apparently aren't very good at heaving to. My boat heaves to just fine. And that's a maneuver that you can throw in and sort of park the boat in a very steady condition. And it's really easy to put in a reef or take out a reef when you're hove to.
I'm
So,
glad you brought that up, because I have a roller furling jib, and I also have a furling main. So my mainsail rolls into the mast. And I tend to, when the wind starts picking up, particularly if I'm single-handed, I will hove to roll up my main.
mm-hmm.
And everything is just calm. It feels like you're rolling it up with no wind at all. I mean, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's certainly a heck of a lot calmer than pointing to the wind in 15 knots and the boom is slapping
never
back
do
and
that.
forth. Yeah,
Never do that.
It's awful. Right?
If you take people out who don't know about this and you heave to, they're going to think you're a witch or something, because they're just so, oh my God, this is amazing.
Right. What did you do? What happened?
Right.
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 It's a remarkable maneuver that I think is not utilized very often by most sailors.
Right. And I practice it. You
Yes.
probably need 7, 8, 9 knots before your boat will really respond and
That's
heave
right.
to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really amazing.
Yeah. I need 10 knots on my boat. And it took me a while to figure out where I have to have things so it will be a steady state heave too. It's not
Right.
trying to do one thing or another.
And where you have to have things is going to be different in 12 knots than
That's
it
right.
is in 20. So yeah, you have to adapt to that. You have to know your boat.
Yes. Yes.
So,
excellent.
and you get to know your boat by going sailing.
Yes. So one thing we talked about was in your sort of mental checklist was reefing, shortening your sails. What's next sort of on your mental list of, okay, the winds are going to start going up. What am I thinking about?
Well, let's talk about the head sail a little bit.
Yeah.
A lot of people will just roll up their head sail, and yes, that shortens sail. And that's perfectly legit with some caveats. The best thing about roller reefing, because the roller system is a furling, it's a roller furling. That's about putting the sail away.
Yes.
But we use them as roller reefing, and if your sail is set up properly, built for it, that's fine. That's fine. But there are some limitations. First, you can take a number 1 head sail and roll it up so it's the same size as a number 3 head sail.
So when you say number 1,
like a
people often think about,
150%.
okay, right. People think in percentages. Okay.
Yeah, your biggest Genoa, like a 150, that's your number 1. You can roll that up so it's the size of a number 3, which would be about 100% sail. Okay, you've reduced the area, that's good, but you've also raised the center of effort. It's going to be many feet on your boat. It's probably going to be 12 feet higher.
That's right.
And that's not helping.
That's right.
Also, the shape of the sail, it becomes pretty baggy when you partly roll it up. probably be okay off the wind. You're not gonna perform to windward very much, and if you have to, and sometimes you do, that's going to be a problem. Um, Second, or additionally, on a head sail, there are reinforcement patches at the head and at the tack, and a sail that's built to be partly rolled will have probably larger contact patches, and you probably can't effectively roll it up farther than the contact patches. So maybe you get 5 or 6 rolls and the contact patch is all the way rolled up then. Well, maybe that means you can't really roll it more than 5 times to have it a useful roller reefed sail. Because now you're loading the sail in a way it wasn't intended. You're loading that fabric without the reinforcements in the
Yes.
corners. And
Yes.
another thing is that a number 1 head sail is built lighter than a number 3. So yeah, you can reduce the area so it's the same as the number 3, but now you have a sail that's really not built for the wind you're using it in. So it's going to be harder on the sail.
Yes.
So all those things, if you're stuck out there and the stuff comes up, those are good strategies. It also depends on the design of your boat in a way. My boat has a bigger fore triangle than a mainsail. My mainsail is about 200 square feet. My 100% head sail is about 300. So the head sail is 50% bigger, and that's not counting a Genoa. So my
Wow.
boat is
My boat's
head
just
sail
the
driven.
opposite. Yeah.
Your boat's just the opposite.
Yeah.
So you're probably gonna
Yes.
put in a reef before you go to a smaller head sail. I'm going to go to a smaller head sail before I put in a reef. Although
Right.
sometimes I'll put in a reef with a bigger head sail. Depends.
Yeah, you're absolutely
Depends
right.
on conditions.
I start rolling up my mainsail.
When you have sort of an analog mainsail, you can put it anywhere you want.
That's right.
The rest of us are more like we have increments that we can use. So that's an interesting thing. I've never been on a boat with a rolling mainsail. I always picture it getting stuck and you having to climb up the rig and stick a knife in the sail and slide down like Errol Flynn to free things up. I don't know
Yes.
if that's in your catalog of things to do.
Errol Flynn with the knife held between my teeth is not
Yeah,
in my experience list, and I hope it
yeah.
never will be. Just like with any system on a boat, you sort of have to know what you're doing, and if you fall outside that spectrum, you can run into trouble.
And you've learned what you're doing with taking the pressure off the main to start rolling it up.
That's
You
right.
need to do that. So
That's right.
and another thing with the head sail is like I was out last summer sailing with my number 1, and the wind came up to like 15, 18, which is too much for that sail. And it's very hard to roll a sail in when you're over its wind power range. I just turned downwind, blanketed the head sail with the main, and boom, 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 rolled it right in. So I'm using the mainsail as a tool to tame the head sail. Also do that with spinnakers too. It's really much easier to take a spinnaker down when you can blanket it with the main. In fact, I don't like, sometimes I'll sail with a spinnaker without the mainsail in very, very light winds, like 5, 6 knots. But 7, 8, I don't like that because I don't have the tool
Right.
of the mainsail to blanket that spinnaker if I need to deal with it if the wind picks up.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice. So what else is on your list of things?
Well,
to sort of think
the
about?
other aspect of the windy weather sailing, and keep in mind this is we're talking about 20 to 30 knots. We're not talking about storm conditions. We're not talking about survival. We're not talking about storm sails and drogues and things like that. We're talking about force 6 or 7, 20 to 30. I'm comfortable up to 30 to 35 knots. Beyond that, I'm heading in and I'm going to lean against a sturdy oak tree. That's Lord Nelson's cure for seasickness. So, but on those occasions, I'm purposely setting up to go out, and I have a really, really nice place to sail from. My dock is a mile up the river from the lake. It's very well protected. Um, we have a really good break wall with some protected area behind it. When the wind is west to northwest, we have a great area of protected water to sail in. And we'll go and set the boat up before we go out. We'll change out the head sail to a smaller head sail. I'm certainly not going to fly a number 1. I have a number 4 that I use a lot. I have a number 5. My number 5 is about probably about 50-60% of the fore triangle. And it's built like a storm jib, but it's much bigger than what an
Yeah.
actual storm jib would be. And it's such a wonderful sail. Oh my goodness, it's so good. Um, and believe me, there's plenty of energy out there at 20 to 30 knots. You're going to be dumping energy. It's not going to be a problem. The only time I might want to, like I said before, I might want to be a little overpowered when I'm dealing with waves, when I'm dealing with
Yes.
heading upwind in waves. But when you're heading upwind, you also have the option of feathering up to unload the rig a bit and depower
Yep.
a bit. But you can only head up as far as the waves will let you.
That's right.
So and on Lake Erie we get short steep chop. So we'll have a very short period between the waves. I don't know what it's like out on an ocean swell. I don't really have a lot of experience with that, but our waves can be very, very challenging. But also, when we turn downwind, well, it's Surf City then. We're having a grand time, hitting double-digit speeds. So that's really not uncommon with the way I have things set up. So we'll put on the small head sail and roll it up, right? It rolls up on the furling, but we have to change it out. And then we'll put in a reef or 2 reefs depending on the conditions. I rarely use the second reef. Our mainsail's kind of on the small side. I'm sure you'd use a second reef more than I would. Um, and we'll don all our safety gear and we'll head out and get some experience. So we can. What's really nice about our location, and I was thinking about this last night. I said, I it's really special. I was trying to think of other locations on the lake here that are like ours, and there really aren't that many. When the wind's really howling out of the west, we'll go out rigged for it, head out the main entrance, and our harbor is a shipping harbor. So the big freighters come in and out of there. So it's a big wide entrance that's got a dredged channel. You can negotiate that entrance in any conditions that you'd want to be out there in. And so that's a really big deal. There's a harbor closer to me that I could walk to, but the entrance isn't nearly as
Yeah.
comfortable. So
Yeah.
I'm happy driving a little to get to the boat to have that. And we'll go out the main entrance and turn downwind and run with the waves for a mile or two, and then we can come about and head upwind behind the break wall. And it's just a great feature of the geography that we just
Wow.
lucked into.
Yeah. So that gives me a thought. Talk a little bit about the differences, 15 to 20 knots or 20 to 25 in that range of going upwind versus going downwind. What things do you sort of think about that, hey, I really got to be careful about this, or I really got to pay attention to this one versus the other?
Well, upwind, I'm trying not to slam the boat in the waves because these short, steep, choppy waves that we get, you can do a lot of that, and that's hard on things. It's hard on crew, and it's hard on the boat.
Yeah.
So I will actively steer around waves, steer off the waves as we go over them just to keep the boat from slamming. I'll crack off a little. You can't get too greedy with your upwind desires in those
Right.
conditions. If it's flat, that's a whole different ball game. And sometimes we get wind out of the south at 20 plus knots. And so we're on a windward shore, if you will. And oh boy, that's a lot of fun. And I'm sure you get conditions like that on Narragansett.
Yes. Yep.
You just got to pick the right side of the bay
That's
for where
right.
the wind is. But it's very nice. So upwind, I'm really steering about keeping the boat comfortable, and then when we're tacking in that, I'll look for a flat place to tack. The waves come in sets usually, and you'll get a whole bunch of big ones. Like, oh, here comes this big wave, and look, there's its sister, and we'll let those go. And then but you get a series of smaller waves, so that's a good spot to tack. And you can also, with some practice, learn how to time your tack so that the next wave helps you turn the boat. The next wave catches the bow of the boat and helps you through the turn. You also have to be careful about tacking tacking promptly and crisply, because you don't want to get stuck in irons. And I'll often crack off a little bit to pick up some speed before I tack. And downwind, I think the biggest concern downwind is going to be an accidental jibe.
Yeah.
Especially in wavy conditions where the boat is getting slewed around, a lot of yaw from the waves hitting you, and you need to anticipate that and compensate for it with your steering. Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing. And I have I just got a boom brake, which is a device you attach to the boom. There's a line that goes across from one side of the boat to the other and goes through the boom brake, and it sort of looks like a figure-8 thing for rock climbing. And you tighten this line, and it applies friction to the boom, and it keeps the boom from slamming across if you get an accidental jibe, or even if an intentional jibe. It's going to be useful for just controlling the mainsail in a jibe.
Yeah.
There's some videos you can find on the internet of demonstrations of these things. There's a good one from Yachting Monthly. I think it's Yachting Monthly, English magazine, with Pip Lauren, where she's testing some of these, giving them a good go. And then also I rig preventers, and proper preventer rig will run from the end of the boom forward almost to the bow, pretty far forward, and then back to the cockpit. You can rig a preventer like that.
So do you both use both the boom brake and a preventer?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. It depends. I mean, these conditions, I've gotten comfortable in these conditions. I'm confident of how the boat is going to behave. I also have I have a jib boom, so my headsail flies on a boom, and I run that wing and wing. The balance of the boat with that is tremendously good. Fingertip steering the whole time. Well, everybody else is, oh, I'm working really hard with this. I'm not working hard with it. And the directional stability is greatly enhanced by being able to wing out the headsail like that. And you can do that with a pole, right? Like a whisker pole. It's a lot to rig.
Yes.
And it's hard to do it without a pole in those conditions because you're rolling so much. But when I wing out my headsail with the boom, the rolling disappears. It's just amazing how stable it is.
Yeah. Do you go dead downwind?
Typically, I'll be running 170 to 165 kind of true wind angle. I can carry wing and wing with my jib boom up to like 140 degrees apparent. It's amazing how high that thing will go. And if the waves aren't bad, higher than that. With the conventional head sail, you can do that if you have a pole. It's pretty much never dead downwind. It can get close to it. I'll tend to run, it depends on the context. We're just out there having fun versus racing. If we're racing and I got a purpose to get somewhere, I'm going to try and squeak down every chance I get, if that's the right course, if that's what I need.
Yeah. I probably go 15 degrees off dead downwind on either side. And I try not to go inside that zone. And I find a couple of things. Number one is, accidental jibes are pretty rare, and the boat sail's nicer, right? It's not. It's hitting the waves at a different angle. The whole experience is nicer than trying to go dead downwind. And I think it's much safer, much more comfortable, and it's easier steering the boat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, and do you ever use a pole
I
on the
don't
head
have a
sail?
pole. It's on my list of things to sort of
Yeah.
get. We
I'd
all have
I'd
that
move it
list.
up. I'd move it up on your list.
Yeah.
It's a really valuable tool. Um, Although if you want to have a pole, a higher clewed head sail is better with a pole.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
as you ease the sail because you're turning off the wind, you don't have to move the jib lead as far forward with a higher clew,
Yeah.
and so that's a nice advantage of that. I mean, I have a number 2 Genoa. That's sort of my general purpose Genoa, and I had that made with a relatively high clew
Just
for a
for that
couple reasons.
purpose.
For
Yeah.
that, well, for that purpose, and also it sheets in about the same place as
Hmm.
the number 1 head sail, so I don't have to fuss with the car position as much.
Yeah.
And here's a big thing: I can see where I'm going.
Yes,
Boy,
that's
that's a
always
treat.
nice, isn't it? That's always nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it doesn't
Well,
catch a lot of water.
yeah. Well, I'll tell you, one of the things, this is the first boat that I've ever sailed or been on, I certainly owned, that has 2 wheels. So I have a wheel on, and for visibility sake and flexibility and a whole bunch of other things, that's really nice.
Yeah, it is. It is. Although your 2-wheel rig, I see the advantage of it. It violates my principle of reliability is inversely proportional to the number of parts.
Yes.
But if it's, I don't know how yours is done. I think if I were designing a system with 2 wheels, they'd be completely independent. So if one of them broke, the other one still worked. I don't know.
Well, they're both connected to the rudder. So mine is not the traditional cables that run
Yeah.
around. Mine
Uh-huh.
is actually, a shaft. It's geared. It's basically gears at the helm
And
that
there's a
goes
tie
down in.
rod.
Yes, that goes into a gearbox
Yeah.
that an arm comes out of. It's like the old
Mhm.
cars used to have the steering wheels,
So
right?
there's an arm from each wheel
That's
going
correct.
to
There's
the,
an arm
so
from each wheel.
if one of them broke, the other one would still work.
That's correct.
That's great. I love
That's
that.
correct. Yeah.
Redundancy. Although you know how you can tell that a tiller is more reliable than a wheel? The backup for a wheel is a
The
tiller.
tiller.
Tells you all you need to know.
That's right. That's excellent. Excellent. I'm going to steal that from you. That's a great saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Let me see what else. We're approaching 45 minutes. So I want to do another 5 minutes or so, Dan, and before we wrap this one up. So what other sort of key things do you want to share with our audience?
Well, get out there and practice is the first thing. Practice as much as you possibly can. Go for rides with people who go out in heavy weather. Become crew on a race boat. They go out in stuff you'd never even think about going out in.
Right.
And it's a great thing to go out there and know that if something goes wrong, you're not responsible. You're along for the ride, but you will
That's right.
learn a lot more about handling the boat in these conditions. Now they're going to be pushing things a bit harder than you might want to,
That's right.
but you'll learn a lot about handling yourself in those more extreme conditions. As far as the boat handling, reduce sail. That's if you get nothing from this but that'll take you a long way. Reduce sail. Um, your reefing system has to work easily, right? All your systems on the boat have to be easy to use. If you can't adjust your outhaul when it's blowing more than 15, then you're not going to adjust your outhaul, and you don't have that as an option. So make sure all those kinds of things are easy to use. Become proficient in getting the boat to balance with trim and the proper size sails. Become proficient at tacking and jibing and heaving to. There's another thing about jibing. I can jibe the boat in 25 knots. It depends on the waves, but there's a point as you come off a wave where the mainsail will become a little bit depowered because you're kind of catching up with the wind a little
Yes.
bit. That's when I jibe. And what I'll do is I'll sheet the thing in, and I'll be up maybe 20 degrees off, dead down, and I'll sheet it in, and I'll start to turn down, and we'll pick up some speed, and we'll get that slack moment, and I swing
Yes.
the thing across right then. And everything's very gentle when I do that, and then I go let it out quickly. But there's also a technique called the chicken jibe, and that's
Oh, I
where you
don't know that.
basically, well, if you're sailing downwind, and say you're uh, 35 or 40 degrees off the wind, it's a little more than you're comfortable jibing in. Well, you can just go all the way around and attack.
Oh, sure.
That's
Got
called
it.
that's called a chicken jibe. But if you're going to do that, you really need to head up to a good close reach and get powered up on that
Get
close reach
get some
before you throw
speed.
in the tack, or you're going
Right.
to end up in irons, or you may
Right.
end up beam two. So you don't want to end up in those conditions. So practice that. Practice all these things when it's not as consequential. You can
Yeah.
you can do a chicken jibe when it's blowing 12 to 15. See what that's like. Um, and also like I have a great advantage where we sail that I have places that I can tuck in and hide out of the wind to deal with raising and lowering sails. Look for those opportunities. Look for those, and don't try rolling out your head sail head to wind. Why would you ever do that?
Right.
It's just a flogging mess. Yeah. And as far as the boat is concerned, you want to make sure everything is in proper order, that all your fittings are properly mounted and strong. You might want to upgrade some fittings. I upgraded my Traveler just because of that fear of an accidental jibe. I don't want to have a problem with that. My cat is here. Is going to join the conversation. Um, secure all the gear down below
Ah,
because it's going to
good
go
point.
flying. It's going to go flying.
Yes.
And also, I would highly recommend not having to go below in these conditions we're talking about, because it's a challenge. It's a challenge to go below and keep your stomach in order.
That's right.
So everything you might need should be close at hand, right? If you need your GPS or your phone or your binoculars or whatever, anything you might need, some snacks, you want to keep those close at hand. I have these great combing boxes on the side of the cockpit. I mean, they're enormous. I get all kinds of things in
Yeah.
there, and
Yeah.
if you don't have
You know,
that, I would come up with something to do that function.
the thing that really forced me to address what you just talked about, which is not having to go below, is when I started going out by myself.
Yeah.
Not in heavy weather, but just going out by myself. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
because the bay's crowded. I can't. I mean, I could run down below for a minute, but man, I got to be careful. So,
Yeah. Yeah. For
so,
sure.
I gotta bring snacks. I gotta have drinks. I gotta, have all the gear I need. I got all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
I would
That,
also make sure that your fuel system is in good order with clean
mm,
filters, because you might stir up some crud in your fuel tank that's been waiting to get stirred up because you've
yeah,
never been out in choppy weather, and that'll ruin your day if you try to get in and you can't start your motor.
yeah.
And if you're somebody who takes anti-seasickness things, do
Take
it
them.
early, because you might stir up some crud in yourself.
Right,
And
right.
it's a lot easier to take it ahead of time than to catch up. It's really, really hard to catch up. Also, in terms of personal gear, you should have proper clothing head to toe. You got to stay dry and you got to stay warm, but you don't want to be too warm. In the summertime, you can get out there and be a little too warm, and that's not when you're trying not to get sick. So you don't want
Yeah.
to be too warm. I always say, like, uh, um, the people I sail with are like, if they don't feel good, they're like, okay, it's time for me to steer. And they're very vocal about saying that. So, because steering is a great way to avoid starting to feel seasick, because you're much more in
Yes.
touch with the motion of the boat, and keep an eye
That's
on the
right.
horizon and those sorts of things. I'm sure you could do a whole podcast on seasickness. Also, I tune my rig a little bit on the tight side for this kind of weather. So if you have those options, and there's some controls. I added a backstay adjuster, and the backstay
Okay.
adjuster is a way on my masthead rigged boat. It tightens the head stay, which flattens
Yes.
the head sail, which gives me another gear.
Yeah.
If I need to, if my head sail is too big at 15 knots, I tighten up the backstay, and maybe I'm going to be okay to 17 or 18. And that's a significant difference. That's a pretty good difference. So, you want to make sure all your gear is in proper shape. We wear life jackets out in this stuff. I would practice with that, because maneuvering around in a life jacket is not the same, and you want to be ready for it. I have pad eyes mounted for harnesses and tethers. A jack line, I think a jack line should run down the middle of the boat.
I
When you're at
agree.
the end of the
100%.
tether, when
Yep.
you're at the end of the tether, you should be inside the lifelines. You shouldn't be able to
We've
go over
talked.
the lifelines.
I've talked
And it's
about
great
this
to,
with a few other guests. It's running
yeah.
them down the side is like you. Now, one of the things I've talked about on other episodes is one day I practiced. I had my lifeline on the side of the boat where most people run it, right? From the bow cleat to the stern cleat on the port or starboard side. And I jumped overboard with my tether on.
Wow.
And I wasn't moving. I was at anchor.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't get back on the boat.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because I said,
Yeah.
I can't get on. I couldn't go down to the stern
Right.
because my lifeline stanchions blocked me from being able to go down to the stern of the boat. And my freeboard is so high, I couldn't get back on the boat. And
So you had to unhook.
Without unhooking. Right.
Yeah.
I had to unhook. Right. So I
Right.
wanted to practice. What would this be like if I fell overboard? And even falling overboard at anchor.
Now
was-
practice that while you're moving at 2
Yeah.
knots.
So that's,
And-
I said, okay, I got to rig these jack lines differently. I can't have them. I got to make it so that I can't fall overboard.
Right. Stay on the boat.
I got to stay on the boat. So it's a false sense of security to say, oh, well, that's all right. I'll fall overboard. At least I won't be watching the sailboat sail away. That may be true because you'll be drowned.
Well, all the safety gear isn't what keeps you safe.
That's right.
You keep yourself safe by practicing good seamanship. The safety gear might help you if something goes wrong, but that's not what keeps you safe.
That's right.
So, but practice with that gear.
Hey, so I had one more question for you. Is there a point in time when under heavy weather sailing where you turn on your auxiliary, you turn on your engine and put it in gear and use it to either help you sail better or steer the boat better? And at what points do you sort of do that? What are the parameters? When you start
Sure,
thinking about
I would have no problem with engaging the motor to get me through a tack if I was having trouble making the tack because of the conditions.
Yes.
That's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. Before you do it though, make sure you don't have any lines in the water. which is also I had another area of discussion with situational awareness. There are things like that, like make sure there are no lines in the water before you start the motor. Stay out of the danger zones on the boat, which means don't stand to leeward of a loaded mainsail.
Right. Right.
There are places where you don't want to be. You may have to pass through them, but don't hang around there. You don't want to sit to leeward of the main sheet. What if it breaks? Think about that.
This is interesting about situational awareness. And this is why I think practicing is important. At least for me, when I'm stressed, my situational awareness goes down. I become narrowly focused when I'm really stressed. I'm not aware of other things that are going on. So that if I'm in an uncomfortable situation, that's what happens to me. I lose my situational awareness. That's why going out in these conditions, even if it's on other people's boats, so that you're comfortable in high winds, even if you're not sailing, right? But you're comfortable, you're not worried about a whole bunch of things, then your situational awareness broadens and you're much more in tune to what's going on.
Being on someone else's boat is a great way to relieve the stress.
Yes, it sure is.
Yeah. Yeah. And also another thing that's a issue with that is like check in on your crew. Right. It can be hard to like, are they okay? Are they doing okay with this? Are they having trouble? Always check in with them. That's why I do a lot of solo sailing.
Right. You
I have a friend of mine says the worst thing about solo sailing is all the yelling.
know. Yes.
So yeah, those are all important. They're all important things, but it really all comes down to practicing these things and
Yeah.
practice when it's not high stakes. And we aren't really talking
Yes.
about super high stakes. 20 to 30 knots shouldn't be afraid of that, but you should be respectful of it.
Right. Right. So I want to make one comment about practice things before we wrap up, and that is this past summer. So I try to every season make a list of one or two things I'm going to work on. And for example, this past season, it was two things. It was getting the boat balanced and trying to be able to sail the boat without a hands on the wheel, right? I really focused on it. Okay, every time I go out, how can I get the boat? What do I need to do to balance the boat? And the other thing was heaving to, right? I want to understand how to do that. And I went out actively practice those things, right? I didn't read a book about how to do it and say, okay, I'm done now. I know what to do. Like you said, you got to learn your boat. Each boat's different. And so I think it's a good sort of thought to leave with people is to say, make a list for yourself of one or two things that you're going to work on this season that you want to get better at.
I wouldn't discourage people from reading the books, though.
Oh no,
And that's not what
but
you're doing.
right.
That's where you start,
That's
and
where
then
you
go
start.
out and try and apply that knowledge. But read the books, find things online, but look for trusted sources when you do that, like like U.S. Sailing or the Offshore Racing Council. Sources like that, I think, are going to be more reliable than you know, Jackie Pants Sailing
Right.
or
Right.
whatever's out there.
Right. Right. Right.
I mean, they may be right on target, Jackie Pants. I don't know. But I have a lot more confidence that if I see something from the Royal Ocean Racing Club, I'm gonna get more vetted information,
Right.
better vetted information.
Right. So Dan, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing this with you. I feel like we got at least a couple more podcasts in us of things that we can talk about.
I
So
have pages and pages that we didn't talk
yeah.
about.
So if you're willing to come on the podcast again, we will book some dates again in the future and talk about some more of these various interesting topics.
That would be great.
Yeah, thanks so much for being on the podcast, Dan. Take care.
Thank you.
Cool interview. Bela, what do you think? I mean, you're a really experienced sailor. Did your conversation with Dan change the way you think about sailing in heavier winds at all?
I think it reinforced a lot of things that that I've sort of learned the hard way. Um, and he is very, very knowledgeable, very thorough, very analytical, reads a lot, and is like a sponge when it comes to these things. And he super pays attention to details. And part of that, I think, is because he's a racer and he's raced a fair amount. And racers pretty much go out in all types of weather, right? If there's a race, unless it's like dangerous, the race is going to happen. So he's exposed himself to those types of conditions. And I think that the key takeaway for me is sooner or later, you're going to encounter winds that are above your comfort range. It's just going to happen. And so when it happens, you want to be able to expand your comfort range. What I mean by that is expand the range of wind conditions and wave conditions that you're comfortable sailing in, because it's going to happen to you. And so then the question is, how do you expand that? And well, you have to go out in that type of weather and get used to it. And I remember, my first season on Narragansett Bay, it was like, well, I think I'll go out in the morning because the winds are going to be high in the afternoon, and I don't want to be out there when the winds are high. And particularly because I get nervous about docking the boat when the wind's blowing, a little stronger, and that's a whole nother conversation. but then I just would force myself to go out. And I think that uh, sort of expanding your range of comfort is a real key takeaway. The other thing is each boat design is different and they behave differently under different weather conditions. So if you get a lot of experience on someone else's boat and then you go out in your boat, there's going to be some things that are different. The boat's going to behave different. It might turn quicker, it might turn slower, it might go better upwind, it might heel more, it might heel less. So you got to get that experience in your boat as well. And this is all about sort of expanding your knowledge about what to do in different situations. So when those situations present themselves, you're comfortable and you're not sort of tense and scared, because when you're tense and scared, you make poor decisions. You sometimes you get paralyzed about what to do and you don't do anything. You got to do something. So I think it's good to sort of distill some of the things that we talked about, Dan and I talked about, and sort of try to apply them to your own situation.
Cool. It sounds great to me, Bela. Do you want to distill those down a little bit, maybe for the takeaways for listeners?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's 5 sort of key takeaways. Start out slow. Don't if it's going to blow at 30 knots and you've never been out in anything above 20, don't go out in 30 knots, right? Go out in 15. And Dan, as I talked about, I start reefing my sails at 15 knots. And lo and behold, he did the same thing. And our boats are very different. But that's the point where I start reefing. And here again, it's getting comfortable. It's easy to reef your sails when you're at the dock and the wind's not blowing. But when the wind's blowing at 15 knots, everything's more difficult. And when the wind's blowing at 20 knots, it's even more difficult. So I always talk about preparing early, start out slow. When you're reefing that sail, there's certain things that you have to do. Build up that muscle memory, as athletes talk about it, right? Or people who play instruments, they talk about building this muscle memory so that things become almost automatic when you're doing them. The other thing is learn how your boat reacts. So my boat has a big mainsail and a small jib or small foresail. Some boats are just the opposite. Dan's boat's sort of the opposite of that. He has a big foresail and a small mainsail. So that means the boat's going to behave different. He has to start reefing in his jib first, and I have to start reefing in my mainsail first. So that's just differences between the boats. And as I talked about, when things don't go as planned or you're outside your comfort range, your sort of stress level goes up, your internal stress level goes up. Our vision, at least for me, when that happens to me, my vision narrows. So I almost have like tunnel vision, and I'm not absorbing or being aware of all the other things that are going on around me. And when you're on a boat and the wind is picking up, you don't want to have tunnel vision, because you want to be aware of all of the other things that are going on. There's a lot of stuff on a boat. And so I think that's really important. So expand not only your sort of comfort level, but sort of expand, and this is the same thing, expand sort of your non-stress window. And the only way that I know how to do that is, yes, become knowledgeable, watch some YouTube videos, read some books, but you got to get out and do it. That's the only way.
Makes sense to me, Bela. Nicely summarized. Any last thoughts?
And the other thing that I talk about a little bit is I often think about, find an experienced sailor that you can take on your boat with you in these situations, so that they can be there sort of guiding you and looking over your shoulder, as opposed to you being the most experienced person on the boat and bringing some other individuals who maybe have never been out in anything above 15 knots. And now you are trying to learn at what to do in 20 knots of wind. So it's better to have more experienced people with you in these learning situations, so that they can sort of help guide you. And then I get comfort out of that as well. So that's another thing I just thought of here.
Yeah, No, makes sense. What do you think? Time to wrap it up?
Yeah, let's wrap it up for now. And I think it was a great conversation with Dan.
Agreed. So, listeners, thanks for yet again joining us for another episode. And we hope you found the conversation with Dan interesting and thought-provoking. If you have questions about what we've discussed, as always, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
And hey, if you enjoyed the podcast, hit that like or follow button on your favorite podcasting app. It helps people find us better. Excuse me. And if you know of someone that would make a good guest for the show, or if you would be a good guest for the show, don't be bashful. Reach out and tell us. That's how Dan got on the show. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you all soon.
And from over here in Münster, Germany, thanks again for listening, and see everybody next time.